California. Most of you know about Dr. Seuss. You know his books, you know his characters, you know some of his quotes. Well, the one I like best is, "Oh, the places you go, there's fun to be done." I've changed the quote slightly for our time together. My quote is, "Oh, the people you will meet." And I have met some fascinating people. I want to start in New York State, where we lived for 17 years. In the early 1960s and 1970s, the governor, Nelson Rockefeller, was the political force that created the Empire State Plaza. Those of you who haven't been to Albany, New York, don't know that the largest state office building complex in the country is in Albany, New York. And appropriately, there was to be a grand opening. And I ended up being co-chair of the opening, and we only had 250,000 guests for 4 days, July 4, 5, 6, and 7. We had no rain, we had fireworks over the plaza, Albany Symphony Orchestra, and our absolute wonderful keynote was a guy named Don McLean. Most of you, not all of you, remember American Pie, which was the top of the charts for that year. So after the opening, I was asked to be the head of the visitor program at the new museum. We had about 1 million visitors the first year I was there, and it was probably the most exciting and wonderful job I could have ever imagined. I could hardly wait to get up in the morning to go to the museum and welcome school children and guests to this wonderful new creation. But one day I got a call from the director of the museum, and he said, "Sally, we're going to have some special guests coming to the museum. Would you be part of the welcoming group?" So I said yes. Turned out that the guests were special. Governor Nelson Rockefeller, his brother Lawrence Rockefeller, the First Lady of the country, who was then Lady Bird Johnson, and New York Governor at that time, Hugh Carey. Well, my assignment was lady-in-waiting. The entourage was to tour the museum, and I was to be the last person in the tour. So if anyone had a problem or a question or something, I would immediately be there. Well, the tour began through the museum, and it was perfect until the end of the tour. Suddenly, former Governor Nelson Rockefeller veered off into the museum shop. Now, many of you have been in museum shops, and you know they sell wonderful things and lots of things that kids can buy and so on. But this shop was to feature New York State artists. So some of the most magnificent wood carvings from artists in the Adirondacks, paintings, sculpture, in addition to the other things that kids like to buy. But the owner of the shop was sure that one particular wooden sculpture, a giant eagle in flight, probably as big as the woodland. I mean, it was big. She had it sitting on the wall, put on the wall, sure that nobody would ever buy it. Governor Rockefeller, of course, went in. I followed him. And what he did was just look and go. And the museum director scribbled and scribbled, and of course I didn't do anything because I was just watching. And just as quickly as he entered, he left. And the museum director came over to me, and the museum shop lady came over and said, "But he didn't pay." A few minutes later, a young man that we hadn't even seen walked into the room, had a list of what he wanted, gave her a card where to mail it, and said, "I'm sure he will pay." But that was one of our fun stories. And when I kept telling myself I was on a shopping trip with Governor Nelson Rockefeller, and he didn't have a penny in his pocket to pay, well, of course, it became a wonderful story. Then, before I talk a little bit about going to California, one more story about the East Coast. We lived on the Hudson River in an old house, went back to 1790, in New Park, 1840. And we were close to Stockbridge, Massachusetts, which many of you know is on the far west end of Stockbridge, Massachusetts. And I'm sorry that people from the Stockbridge-Muncie community, at least the table sponsor isn't here. Is anyone here from the Stockbridge-Muncie group? Yes. Oh, good. Well, long story short, one Saturday morning, friends came to visit. We were sitting at the table, and we said, "Where would you like?" "This is Sally Davis, and I live in New York, and I want to come and see your paintings." And he said, "Well, Mrs. Davis, if I allowed people to come into the studio, I would not get any work done. However, the Historical Museum does have my paintings, and yes, it is open on Saturday." I said, Thank you very much. I hung up the phone, went back to the table to Jim and our friends, and I said, "I just talked to Norman Rockwell." And they said, "Yeah, yeah. I said, no, really, I did." Well, we went to Stockbridge that afternoon. We did see the Four Freedoms, which, as you know, are among the most famous, and a lot of his other work. And then we went to the back of the building, and there were exhibits of the Stockbridge-Muncie community. And guess what? I recognized almost everyone in the pictures, because either I'd gone to school with them, or I met them when my dad had an ice route in and around Gresham, or we met them at the John Sargent Memorial Presbyterian Church in Red Springs. And you all probably know John Sargent was the first missionary to work with the Stockbridge Indians, and he was the first one the Indians allowed to work with him. So I just felt like I had had the most wonderful time, unexpectedly, seeing people I knew, people who were honored because of their community and because of their place in the tribe. So it was just a wonderful day for me. Now let's go to California, and I have promised I'll be 20 minutes, so hang on to your seats. One of the things I did in California for the California Arts Council was to welcome Hollywood stars who came to Sacramento, California, the state capital, to advocate for the arts. Now you have to know, you all know about state budgets. They take away, they give, they take away, they give. Well, in California, about 1,000 people came every year to rally for the arts. They were at the community center, then they walked across the street to the state capitol and lobbied with legislators. And that worked okay, but guess what? If you brought a Hollywood person or two, you got entree pretty quickly. Well, I had lots of wonderful experiences with people, but my most fun was Gene Stapleton. Now, those of you who grew up in the 70s know that All in the Family was one of the most popular television shows in America. And Gene Stapleton was Edith Bunker. She spoke at the rally, and then I took her across the street to the Capitol. And as we entered the Capitol, we walked over to the elevator. Now, again, some of you are too young, but in the older days, elevators had operators. They had on white gloves. They had on little uniforms, they had a little hat, they sat on a little stool, and there was a gate that was kind of like a scissor, open and shut. And they would welcome you in, shut the gate, push the button, and up you go. So we walked into the elevator, and this beautiful little woman looked up and said, "Oh, Mrs. Bunker, I'm so thrilled. I've watched every All in the Family program, and I just can't tell you how excited I am." And Miss Stapleton said, "Thank you very much. It's very kind of you," and so on. We left the elevator, and she said, "You know, I used to think, I don't want to be called Edith Bunker. My name is Jean Stapleton, but my name has become synonymous with a whole lot of women in this country who maybe or maybe not were married to men like Archie. but who often got in the last word. You know, Archie would be off on a tangent, and she would say something, and he'd go, and the program would end, as you probably know. Anyway, we got to Senator Roberti's office. Senator Roberti represents Hollywood in that district. And everybody in the Capitol knows when a Hollywood star is coming. And they glom in the hallways, and they glom in the offices. So we entered his office. There must have been 50 people there. It must be hard to be a star. I mean, really, it's just, you know, people just kind of glom onto you. Well, anyway, we walked into the inner office, and he was on the telephone. And he indicated we could sit. Well, of course, lady in waiting always sits behind the proper person. So she sat in front row. I sat behind her a little to the left. And he was on the phone. And then he kind of hung up the phone and said, "Oh, Miss Stapleton, I'm so glad you're here because I agree with you. And I have heard from so many Hollywood people about this that I am going to be part of the legislation." And then his office secretary came in and handed him a note. And I leaned over and I said to Miss Stapleton, "Miss Stapleton, we're here to talk about the arts budget of California." And she sat back, of course. He folded up the note, and she sat forward on her chair and said, "Senator Roberti, I am here to talk about the arts in California. And you have to know that the reason we have civilization and things from civilization is because of arts. That is the lasting thing." She went on and on, and on and on and on and on. And you all know she had this high-pitched voice for Edith Bunker. Not really as a theatrical actress. You know, she was very good. She was doing, and as she talked, her voice got higher, higher. And pretty soon I thought Edith Bunker was really speaking to him. Well, the poor man didn't have a chance. He just said, "Miss Stapleton, I will do everything I can to help you with the budget." And anyway, that was one of my nice experiences with her. I want to finish by talking to you a little bit about then the Hollywood stars that I think at least some of the young people will know and all of you older people will know. I worked with 58 local arts agencies, one in each of California's 58 counties. Each of those chose 2 or so high school kids, mostly seniors but often juniors, to attend the summer school for the arts. And it was a wonderful program for 6 weeks at a campus in the Los Angeles area. After the kids were chosen, the kickoff was to come to Los Angeles and go to a Hollywood movie studio where the kids would meet some Hollywood stars, have a chance to get a little bit more acquainted with Los Angeles. So you have to remember, California is a big state, and some counties don't even have a stop line. And we're talking, you know, from Los Angeles to Alpine and everything in between. So for some of these kids, this was truly the most exciting thing that they could ever do. Well, our guests that year were 2. And my job was to go out to the street in front of the sound stage where the kids and their parents were sitting and welcome the guests. So the first guest drove up in this rather simple car, not too new, not too old, not too clean, not too dirty. He got out and he had on a jacket, tie, kind of askew, shirt, you know, neither here nor there. And he walked over and said, "Hi, I'm Walter Matthau." And I said, "Hi, Mr. Matthau, I'm Sally Davis." "Yes, yes, yes. What are we doing here today?" And I said, "Well, you're going to tell kids how great it is for them to have an arts experience at a summer school Yes, I do know that. Now, where do we go from here? And I said, well, we're going to walk across the street. And so he chatted like an old sheep, just like he was on The Odd Couple and with Jack Lemmon and so on. Took him in, sat him down, went back for the next guest. Well, the next guest pulled up in a DeLorean, and all of you men know that a DeLorean is the gull wing over the top of the car. So when you slide out, you do feet first, and the shoes were shined. You do pants second, and they were knife pressed. Then you kind of move your waistline, which is very slim. Then your very large shoulders. Huge shoulders come out in this coat. And then this large head, and you all know he had reddish hair, and he always has a pompadour because he's not very tall. In fact, he's probably my height, and you would never know it. Well, you all know it was Arnold Schwarzenegger. So anyway, I said, Mr. Schwarzenegger, I'm Sally Davis. Put up my hand. He said, hello. So that's what he said. He didn't say anything to me, so we walked in. He didn't say a single word. Got to the studio, sat down, and like Walter was here, Arnold was there, and I was sort of over here, kind of watching the parents. Well, Walter Matthau got up, and the kids all went, who is this guy? The parents were like, oh, isn't this wonderful? It's Walter Matthau. Walter spoke. And he said very briefly and very wonderfully, kids, your parents, your opportunity here today. Your school helped you, your parents helped you. They sacrificed for you, they gave you lessons, or they took you places. Your parents are the people that we should thank today. And of course the parents were all applauding, and the kids were sort of nice thing. Then came Arnold, and the kids are all on the edge of their chair. They've all seen Conan the Barbarian. They've all seen Terminator. The parents are going, who is this guy? No parent in the room knew who he was. So, of course, the kids were on the end of their seat. Arnold told an interesting story. I don't know about your politics here, but he said he came to America because of Ronald Reagan. He heard Ronald Reagan talk about America. That was the place in the world to be. It was the place that gave you opportunity. Everything was going right. So that's when he decided to come to America. And those of you from Wisconsin know he spent some time at Superior, at college, before he went on to Los Angeles. Well, anyway, he kept on sort of talking about this, and the kids were just, I cannot tell you how excited they were. And then he closed by saying, and he held up his hand and he picked his finger out, he said, and kids, anybody can make it in America. And the kids applauded, and the parents quiet. But anyway, that was my experience with those two. Now, the last thing I want to talk about very quickly is music. And those of you who, again, were around in the 1990s and 2000s know that there was a group of men called the Three Tenors. Luciano Pavarotti from Italy, and Jose Carreras and Placido Domingo from Spain. Well, my husband and I went to a movie at the Sacramento Tower Theater, and as we left, there was a big sign that said, enter all expense paid contest to New York City to see Jose Carreras in concert. Jim filled it out, and I said, why are you doing this? I'm not going to win anything. Well, a week later, he won. February 4th, we flew to New York City, limousine met us, and the day before we arrived, New York City had the largest snowfall since the blizzard of 1888. So the snow was higher than any Wisconsin person had ever seen. I mean, it was just huge. You couldn't see anything. It was just snowbanks all over. Well, this guy in the car had something on his dashboard that showed as we were traveling. It was called GPS. We'd never heard of it before. So there we are in New York City, 1994, going into the city. We get to the hotel. There's no sign on the hotel. And we say to the guy, are you sure? He said, yes. It was the Rockstar Hotel of the world. All the international rock stars stayed there. They all wore black leather hats, black leather jackets, black leather pants, black leather boots. Well, we didn't. So you see, we did stick out just a little bit. Anyway, the next night or so was the concert, and we were sure nobody would go to Radio City Music Hall to see Jose Carreras because no parking, nobody was driving cars. But on our way over in our driver's car, we saw people come out of the subway like ants. They just came and they came and they came. And pretty soon, Radio City Music Hall, which has, 5,000 or so people, was filled to capacity. Sure. We're 6 rows from the front. There's Jose Carreras singing. And afterwards, we went to the green room to meet him. Well, when I said hello, guess what he did? He kissed my right hand. I didn't wash it for a long time. Back to Los Angeles. We had an artsy event, and Plácido Domingo and his wife were there, and I happened to be standing next to him, and, what do you say to Plácido Domingo? Hi, how are you? So anyway, I said, I have to tell you a wonderful story. I met Jose Carreras. Oh, Jose, how is he? Oh, I said, he's fine. The reason he gave the concert, by the way, is because he had acute leukemia. He was cured at the Fred Anderson Cancer Center in Seattle, Washington. So all of his concerts were to benefit the hospital. So that's kind of the background of this. Anyway, so I told Mr. Domingo that I had my right hand kissed by Jose Carreras, and he said, well, and he kissed my right hand. Now I only have one to go, right? Pavarotti to go. Well, Jim and I went to 2 of his concerts, but unfortunately, I have to wait until I meet St. Peter, and then when I do, I'm going to say, St. Peter, I've got one request. I've had my hand kissed by Jose Carreras, Plácido Domingo. Could I please have a moment with Luciano Pavarotti? When we moved from California to Madison, I found a little book I'd written as an 8th grader at Gresham School. And my teacher was Mrs. Wisniewski, Mrs. Venice Wisniewski. And we had to write about our family and what we thought our future would be. So I talked a little bit about my dad's family, the Bittners, my mother's family, the Searings, and a little bit about how I grew up. And then I said on the last page something like, I want to travel, I want to meet different persons, and I want an exciting future. And I have to tell you, I've had all of that. I didn't think it would happen, but I'm grateful to Gresham for growing up here, for going to school here, for being totally supported. And I want to thank each of you for working like you do for this school, which meant so much to my family. And to all you seniors over there, good luck, exciting futures, travel, and listen to Dr. Seuss. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sally.